Alright everyone, back to Ebola now. Of course, there hasn't really been that much to talk about for it for the last week or so, but it is still burning through the Congo. There have been new cases. I think it's above 90 cases now, so this is now a localized epidemic. The problem is, now the World Health Organization, and they're reluctant at all times to tell people how bad a situation really could get. Now, remember, the last Ebola epidemic, they're like, no, we can contain it, don't worry. It's only a few tens of thousands of dead people, and possibly twice that, because people are hiding the remains when they bury people in their shallow grave. The WHO has come out now and said, well, the risk is growing as we have more cases that all of these rebels in the region, see, there's a civil war going on where the Ebola epidemic is taking place. There's a great risk that because they cross the Congolese border, it could spread Ebola elsewhere. Now, of course, all you need is for one infected rebel to go infect one other person who, they're not symptomatic, maybe they're fleeing actively violence. They flee to a refugee center, some place of high population density, which, isn't necessarily going to have a lot of clean water and medical supplies anyway, and all of a sudden now you've got 100 dead people lying around, their fucking bloated carcasses, there's no one to bury them. The World Health Organization's Doctors Without Borders, all these groups, they have difficulty because they're literally having to be brought around by armed guards. And those people, they're not wearing hazmat suits necessarily. You therefore have the higher chance of an infection happening. And especially in a war zone where people might already be sickly, certainly all of these people are likely immunocompromised. Specifically because the availability of nutrition, which in the West is quite high and helps to prevent, actually pandemics from breaking out to some extent. For certain types of disease, it's not present. It's like tuberculosis. I've pointed this out. The reason why you don't see a tuberculosis epidemic right now in the United States is predominantly not because people are immune. You've got TB now entering the population. It's just they're all asymptomatic. Their immune systems, because they are properly nourished, because they've got a roof over their head and they're not always cold and overworked and underfed and drinking putrid water or something. Because the general standard of living is higher, it actually allows their immune system to suppress the disease. 99% of the time you're going to be positive of TB, not even going to show symptoms. You're not going to need treatment. Eventually, generally, it gets cleared out of your system, although it can become quite chronic. In a place like the Congo, where you have a relatively low human development index, where you have a civil war going on, could be a problem. Now, also, it's entered at least one urban setting there as well. I can't remember, I think it was Butembo was the name of the city. Now, thankfully, by the standards of Central Africa, could be worse. It is more spread out, has more infrastructure, is a bit better than a lot of the urban settings that certainly are going to be present in parts of Africa that are subjected to Ebola outbreaks. But it is still worrying, and there's still time for that potentially to take hold and spread. Thankfully, it looks like they've managed to contain it there. But when you have people running around who might be infected, and they're crossing borders, they're engaged in literal combat, could be a problem. How do you know that that dude is wounded and not just bleeding out of every orifice for other reasons? Oh, some dude walks up covered in blood, maybe you think, oh, well, the dude next to him just got hit by a rocket or something. No, he's actually got Ebola, and you just, tried to take him over your shoulder away from the combat, now you've got it too. Big fucking mistake. Bad situation. War can breed disease. Let us not forget one of the reasons why the Spanish flu epidemic actually existed in the first place was trench warfare. You've got all these people passing disease in cramped, unsanitary conditions. It became a breeding ground for people to be reinfected over and over again in prison hospitals. That's where the Spanish flu, originally the mutant, actually arose, literally, in the sort of the shadow of trench warfare. Here you've got a civil war, jungle warfare. It's not a very pleasant situation to be in, I'm sure. And you have the rapid movement of large numbers of people who may be fleeing. Some rebel group is advancing, the entire village relocates. If you have Ebola in such a situation where people are migrating more often, where people are crossing borders because they're not exactly fully defended, now you could see it spread to other nations quite easily. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but now the World Health Organization is openly proclaiming it's a disaster waiting to happen. The WHO usually tries to tamp down on people's fear. And Ebola, remember, The last epidemic is in the public consciousness. A lot of people here were practically in Texas, you'll remember, when they had that one person with Ebola, that one doctor they brought back to Texas. Remember how they had, live streams and stuff. The whole city pretty much came to a standstill. People were absolutely terrified. For a couple of days, I think it was Houston. It was like a large chunk of the city basically stopped functioning. I think it was Houston, if I remember. Now, I remember one individual who had Ebola from this area literally came back to Rutland. I remember I was like, hey, that doesn't sound like the greatest idea. It's not exactly necessary. Couldn't you wait another week of quarantine or something and not simply say, hey, we're bringing you back here. Just stay in your house for a while, and you can't possibly spread it because we know everything about this disease that we're openly admitting we don't know everything about. It was very funny. In a war zone, it's even worse. The last time around, with the last Ebola epidemic, it spread in part due to funerary practices. This time it's spreading due to a war. I guess we have to wait and see which one is worse. I think the population density overall in this area is more spread out than like maybe central Sierra Leone or some of the urban settings of Liberia, where it was before Guinea. But that's not necessarily going to stop the spread of the disease, especially when, again, medical professionals, you could set up a research team could go in and get completely splattered by rebels. They're like, hey, we want their gear. We want their vehicles. And so they go in, they attack them. They know that these are rich individuals. They could take them for ransom, try to take them hostage and say, hey, you want your doctors back. You're going to have to pay us for it. It could happen quite easily. Be a little bit like pirates taking control of a plague ship, but it could definitely happen, especially when these groups desperately impoverished, fighting, in their sectarian manner. They're not going to really care if the doctor's like, hey, you don't want to enter this vehicle. It has had Ebola patients in it. They don't fucking care. They don't really mind. In some cases, superstition plays a role as well. It's like, well, I've got this magical charm to protect me from disease. These cases even happen in the West from time to time. So, yeah, it's potentially a disaster waiting to happen. And it probably should be taken more seriously. Like, there should probably be an effort to try to broker some sort of peace talks between these various fighting groups. Be like, hey, can you stop killing each other for a month or two? Thanks, we've got a major disease outbreak here. Might behoove you. That's about all. Peace out.